Today's show is sponsored by DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean offers the simplest, most developer-friendly cloud platform. It's optimized to make managing and scaling apps easy with an intuitive API, multiple storage options, integrated firewalls and load balancers, a new managed Kubernetes service, and much more. From predictable pricing to flexible configurations to world-class customer support, you'll get access to all the infrastructure services you need to grow your business. Plus, DigitalOcean's community provides over 2,000 tutorials to help you stay up to date on the latest open source software, languages, and frameworks. So to get started on DigitalOcean for free, with a free $50 credit, go to do.co/cloudcast. That's do.co/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you from the massive remote Cloudcast studios here in Italy, doing a little bit of international traveling. So recording the Cloud News of the Week from Italy this week. Actually, having spent a little bit of time around the Vatican and the Colosseum, it does put a little bit of perspective in the massive size of the massive Cloudcast studios relative to some other massive studios of entertainment and recording and gathering. So, anyways, with that, let's get to this week's Cloud News of the Week. A couple of interesting notes this week. The first one is GitHub acquired, I guess Microsoft acquired, but GitHub acquired Semmle. Semmle, which is a code analysis company out of the Bay Area. That functionality will be added to GitHub. GitHub continues to be a really, really interesting acquisition by Microsoft. You know, they're adding CI and CD capabilities to the platform. They're adding actions to the platform. This is an area that we're definitely going to be digging into further as we get into the end of 2019 and definitely into 2020. GitHub is maybe going to go down as one of those acquisitions that is going to be tremendously undervalued and tremendously strategically important to Microsoft. So another area of acquisition for GitHub. The second one was Microsoft announced what was called Project Saturn for their Azure Stack. And essentially what they're doing is they are re-architecting Azure Stack to be based on containers. So sort of an interesting thing. Azure Stack really has not gotten a whole lot of notoriety or mention in the news lately. Hasn't really been discussed a whole lot by Azure. But, for a long time, and again, it's a platform that's been out there for quite a while. You don't really hear much about it in terms of adoption. But it was really supposed to be sort of a cornerstone of Microsoft's hybrid cloud strategy. So very interesting to see them kind of going back and re-architecting the platform around containers. Obviously, we see a lot of uptake of containers and Kubernetes and other technologies around containers. So it will be interesting to sort of follow this to see if it takes as long as other adoption of Azure Stack is taken and actually engineering of Azure Stack. So something to keep an eye on. And then finally, last piece of news, and this is sort of one small little piece of a much bigger piece of news. If you follow at all the kind of the politics and the wranglings going on in the United States, there has been a lot of recent interest from the regulators in the United States looking at sort of antitrust of some of the big technology companies. So Google, Facebook, Amazon, and so forth. And the U.S. Congress this week subpoenaed a number of those companies this week looking for some details about how they potentially do some antitrust activities. Again, this is all just speculation and requests for subpoenas and documents and so forth. But there was one little sort of interesting piece that got mentioned in this news was that they are looking at how Amazon Web Services, AWS, looks at the usage patterns of both the technology partners that run on AWS as well as their customers to try and sort of detect patterns of usage and then potentially look at how Amazon can build services of their own based on that usage. So, not anything sort of new for anybody who follows the show. We joke all the time that AWS reInvent is always the place where they're going to announce killing off some of their more successful technology partners. I think it's been pretty well known for a long time that Amazon has a pretty unique advantage in that they get to see what's going on in their cloud. They can look at usage patterns and they take advantage of that visibility to try and build either better platforms and services for AWS or potentially new and competitive offerings in the marketplace. So not trying to make any speculation about AWS or what the U.S. Justice Department or anybody will do, but just something to sort of keep an eye on as we get close to the end of 2019 and move into 2020. So with that, I'm going to wrap up Cloud News of the Week. Hope everybody's having a good week, and we will get to our interview. Today's show is sponsored by PricingWire. Think about all the time, effort, uncertainty, and everything else you are investing into the software solution you're building. PricingWire has helped more than 1,000 software and technology innovators like you take a proactive approach to both discover and get paid what you're truly worth. From early startups to Fortune 500 enterprises, across verticals and around the globe, PricingWire delivers easy-to-understand and actionable recommendations to guide your monetization and pricing strategy. If you want to avoid unnecessary challenges or costly regrets, and prevent missing time-sensitive revenue opportunities, PricingWire can help. Just go to pricingwire.com and book a strategy session today. PricingWire helps technology innovators like you design the right offerings, better quantify and message value, set and change prices, select the right pricing metrics, or even decide if usage-based pricing is best for you. Why wouldn't you want to achieve your revenue goals faster and with more confidence? Learn more at pricingwire.com and start making meaningful progress today. And we're back. It is good to be back with all of you again this week. You know, one of the things that has been floating around for a long time and for good or for bad, we all have systems that we have to put together, but then obviously there are systems that we have to maintain, we have to monitor, we have to keep track of because they're important. They run our business, they run important applications, and you know, there are different perspectives on how to do that, and whether we call that monitoring, whether we call it observability, whether we call it single pane of glass, whether we call it, the tools that you use in dashboards. And so we think it's always important to kind of dig into not only what are the best practices, maybe some of what the problems are, but really dig into what are the new things that are happening in this space. What are some of the areas that we need to pay attention to? So very, very excited today to have Björn Rabenstein, who is an engineer at Grafana Labs. Björn, welcome to the show.
Welcome. Thanks for being here.
So you just recently joined Grafana Labs, but prior to that, you worked on some very interesting things at a couple of different places. Give us a little bit of your background, the types of things that you've been working on for the last few years, and some of the places you were doing it at.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the shortest version is like Google, SoundCloud, Grafana, like joining smaller and smaller companies in my life. I mean, Google was the place where I was for the longest time, like more than 7 years. I was there an SRE. So when I joined, SRE felt to me like a very mature thing. But in hindsight now, it's like pretty early on. That was like 2006 when I joined the team. And then later I joined SoundCloud I found a lot of other ex-Google SREs there in my company. And among them were Matt Proud and Julius Foltz, who are now famous as the founders of Prometheus. And that was kind of how they lured me into it. They said, we're doing something crazy here. We're like revolutionizing open source monitoring. And I said, yeah, you're indeed crazy. Let's do that. And I mean, nobody anticipated that we would at some point be here and be in podcasts and talk about that. The rest is history in a way. Recently, I joined Grafana mostly to double down on Prometheus. At SoundCloud, I mean, obviously, SoundCloud is a music streaming company. So creating open source monitoring, it wasn't like on their business agenda, which is perhaps a good thing because that allowed us to do this without any like business interest as a true open source project. But like to really do this full time, I kind of had to change companies, or I had to say, okay, it's just a tool, and I'm like really doing the SoundCloud thing, which is a lot of things, very interesting. But I decided at some point, Prometheus it is, and now at Grafana, which is doing a lot of like observability things, Prometheus is a really important part of their whole strategy.
Yeah. No, we've had Julius on the show a couple of times, folks. If you want to go back and listen, Julius was one of the people that helped create Prometheus, which has now sort of become one of the de facto sort of logging and monitoring tools, especially around the Kubernetes space with containers and so forth. So we'll put that in the show notes if you're newer to the show and you want to go back and listen to it. It's interesting that you say that, even way back in 2006, when you were beginning to do SRE work at Google, that it felt like a mature thing. And I say that just because if we get into the broader industry, SRE as a concept, while Google kind of pioneered it, a lot of people, a lot of companies are still just beginning to get introduced to the concept. They're starting to just understand the terminology, the kind of the process and so forth. So it is always interesting to hear how many things had been mature at Google for a long time, and then they kind of got out into the real world, and people are trying to figure out if they make sense for them and adapt them and so forth. So yeah, it's always interesting to put things in historical perspective like that. Let's talk a little bit about about Grafana. We're going to talk a little bit about Grafana, the technology and so forth. But give us a sense of, you're kind of new over there, but you're focusing on that as a tool and a technology. For anybody who's new to Grafana, what is it and kind of what's its purpose?
I mean, if people hear Grafana, they obviously think about Grafana, the dashboard builder, which is the open source dashboard builder that the company was built around, essentially. I mean, there are a lot of details. Grafana is very transparent about their business concepts, their history, whatever. They have a really interesting, very busy blog, so you can read up everything. But Grafana also developed into a company that is doing all kind of things, observability. We like our newest invention is we call it LGDM, which is like looks good to me especially at Google, I think, but I think it's now very like common in code reviews. If you like it, you type LGDM. But for us, it's like logs, graphing, tracing, and metrics.
Nice.
And the G could be Grafana, but it could be something else. I mean, that's also this like big tent approach of Grafana. We have our own products. We have open source projects where Grafana people are really heavily involved in, but we don't lock anybody into any single one. So it should all be compatible and interoperable, whatever, if that's a word.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, it's very interesting for me coming there. Like I'm clearly specialized on this Prometheus part, but you see all those other moving parts in this very like ecosystem that is so much alive at the moment. I mean, it's really exciting to be there.
Yeah. And for anybody who's, kind of been paying attention, we've had a number of companies on who, their initial purposes, they were maybe the originator or the creator or the kind of the leader of one of the open source projects. So in this case, Grafana Labs is probably the leading contributor to Grafana, the project. And it's interesting to watch these different companies, the business model side of it, which is, you want to continue to have a really robust community around your open source project so that, it grows in features, it grows in adoption. But then there's typically an enterprise version of it. And then there's also more and more we're seeing a hosted managed cloud version of it. So, Grafana Labs runs a number of those offerings as well, which is, it's good to see this sort of consistent evolution. If you're an end user, you have a number of really powerful options out there. There's the open source option usually. There's the enterprise option that'll be supported as software that you can run yourself, and then there's the managed offering. So it gives you lots of flexibility in terms of how you want to consume it or pay for it or manage it or not manage it.
Yep. And what I also like as an engineer, I like about Grafana that whatever they offer as like a hosted offering, there's no secret sauce, right? You could, in principle, just plug together all those open source projects on your own. It's right. Not that like you pay us for something we host, which is then a very secret thing you could never run on your own or by some other company. Like it's kind of a zero login approach.
Yeah, and given how fast all these projects move, the option to have somebody else manage it for you, deal with upgrades, deal with back-end scaling is kind of a nice option if you just want to focus on your applications or other parts of your business. Let's start with because you've got a bunch of experience, as an engineer, both in terms of building tools but also maintaining environments. I want to kind of poke at your experience a little bit. Let's kind of start with good hygiene and good practices in today's sort of modern world. If you were talking to somebody who says, "Hey, we're going to start building more modern applications, things that are changing more rapidly," maybe what are from an ops SRE perspective, what are some of those just basic good hygiene, good practices that you want to make sure that they're kind of checking off boxes and saying, "Yep, we do this, we're preparing to do these things"?
Yeah, I mean, there are probably a lot of things I could talk about right now. And I mean, I'm usually this type of person that doesn't have a really strong opinion about things because I often think it really depends on your context. I mean, there's this common topic of we just do everything like Google did because we also run the world's biggest search engine or something.
Yep.
I mean, it's very. I mean, I would say on a meta level, it's you should not just blindly following like cookbook style recipes or something. You need to find your own way. I've seen that going through various companies in my career. I was like a freelancer before Google, which is like so long ago now, of course. But I saw a lot of different approaches, and then Google was like so different from everybody else. And then coming back to the normal world, yeah, you could see a lot of things, and you could also see a lot of fundamental mistakes. But it's really hard to say like, okay, here are the top three things you have to look at. I would think that would be more like marketing and probably could be disproven quite quickly.
Yeah. What about the flip side of mistakes? Are there kind of common things that you hear about and you know just makes the hair on your arm stand up because you know that's going to be a problem for someone?
I don't know. I mean, perhaps you could just like narrow it down to some like monitoring observability things.
Yeah.
And because like, yeah, I mean, I've also, whenever I changed jobs and evaluated companies, I could totally see, okay, this company probably they already made a bunch of mistakes. And then I was for a while thinking I should just like do a consulting service for startups, import mistakes in your first 3 months or something to avoid. But yeah, it's really hard to nail it or narrow it down to just a few things.
Yeah. Yeah. What are some of the things, you know, you're in the observability space, but also, you know, having been around Prometheus for a while, the monitoring space, what are, you know, there's a lot of hype around that right now. There's a lot of people using those tools, but then, you know, a lot of, you know, monitoring companies that are out there. I saw an interesting quote, just was floating around on Twitter, you know, where, you know, somebody said, hey, I spoke with the CIO today, and they were really frustrated. They have 37 or 35 different tools that are out there, and they still feel like they just don't have a good view of what's going on. They don't feel like they can be proactive. What do you feel like are some of the things that you know is hype out there today? Maybe that's, you know, it needs to kind of get tamped down, or what are some of those things that you feel like you're talking to your peers about, and you're like, boy, I wish those weren't such a big deal, because we still have to just get to the basic things of making sure the systems run.
Yeah, I mean, hypes, you could also say on a meta level, like just be very suspicious about hypes. I mean, there's a whole series of hypes, and I think it's just human nature. It has been that way for a long time that people write the hypes. And I can totally see, like the quote you said, I can see that in larger organization. I mean, there's the initial, like the blissful ignorance, I guess. We had this for a long time in the monitoring / observability, whatever that means, world, where people were just not thinking about it, or it was literally an afterthought. So they started thinking about it after the fact. They mostly delegated it to the ops team, but at some point, systems get more complex and you get outages. You don't even have a clue. First of all, you notice the outage because people tweet about it, and then you don't know how to find out what's actually wrong. And I see from that point, you feel this pressure, like I have to do something. And then I guess the company where that CIO is probably top bottom. They decide, okay, we just buy services, right? And there's a bunch of often pretty good services, monitoring as a service, but you still have to use it in the right way, and just paying somebody money won't necessarily solve your problems. Often it's a lot of money. Like those services tend to be quite expensive, especially when there weren't many and there was not competition. And then you just throw money at the problem, you order more and more products, but it doesn't necessarily help you. And then you are in that situation. Like at SoundCloud, I was kind of I mean, they were certainly not into, we just throw money at the problem, and they were small enough or like anarchic enough to not be like top down. But they had more the problem that they had no clue what's actually going on. There were some like innovative approaches with like StudsD, which is it's not that old actually, and it had a lot of good ideas. StatsD plus Graphite. Here we are getting into dashboarding. And then, of course, Nagios. Like everybody used Nagios and nobody really loved it. And they had this problem, right? They were just not, they didn't even know that something went wrong in many cases. And there were like baby steps towards getting better. And also, of course, this was the environment where Prometheus was created. And there was actually, this was pretty clear. I mean, there were still fights for like convincing people to use this, to invest the effort. But once something happened, there was a very strong realization that this was actually increasing our reliability a lot. I think they even had a little survey among all the managers. They should write down the one top reason why reliability improved over the last month or whatever. And almost everybody mentioned improved monitoring as the reason.
Yeah. What have you found, whether it was in your SRE days or as you were working with the teams building these new tools? Like, are there certain things that you found that like something wasn't there before, and then they started doing something? So maybe it is, we're putting the dashboards up on these big screens around the office so people can kind of see what's going on, or is it, we started explaining the importance of a metric to somebody that maybe they wouldn't have understood before? Like, are there, you talked about, whether it was the management team understanding it better or people just feeling like uptime was better. Have you found, kind of when some new thing kind of gets introduced or some new thing gets educated, it's made a bigger difference than other things in the past?
Yeah, I mean, sure. Every one of those made a difference, but they also, like, because we're talking about hypes, a hype has this inherent feature of like, I mean, it starts off and then you overdo the new thing, right? So like, let's say dashboards, that's what we could say. There was a hype because people realized, oh, dashboards are actually pretty and we can put those big wall screens everywhere and people can watch what's actually going on. And then you can totally see how this ends overdone or abused, especially if you stop there, right? I mean, if you see this as the start of a journey, that's probably a good approach. But if you like are totally hyped by that and put it up everywhere and then you're done with it, then you're doing something wrong, right? And this was even named. Like, I mean, initially we had this world where nobody had like metrics anywhere, and then people realized they like drink the Kool-Aid and now they instrument their code and they have metrics everywhere, and it's so easy with Prometheus. And yeah, everybody likes it. And I mean, we were overwhelmed by that hype, but it was then clearly a hype where people tried to see this as an end, not as a mean, and yeah, also overdid it. Like, there were then people starting to, like, I was in talks where people said you should like throw away those wall screens. They're like an dead alley you go down, because yeah, that's not what you should have. There was, I mean, I've collected a whole like list of things that I still have to finalize. I'll give a talk at Velocity in Berlin next month. No, in November. It's 2 months, whatever. And I will have a really nice list with all the citations that are needed here. One of them is, for example, the Seeking SRE book. It's one of those 3 blue SRE books that were published by O'Reilly. There is an SRE anti-pattern chapter, and anti-pattern 2 is human staring at screen. It's written by Blake Bissett, I think, Dropbox, whatever. Like, he writes about this thing that people like, they like graphical representation. It's certainly helpful, but then they get into this habit of realizing something is wrong by staring at like colorful curves on the screen. And that's not what you want, right? You want the machines to find out about this and then alert you. And yeah, I mean, we could talk a lot more about this, but it's a clear indication where initially it was bad to not have those dashboards, but once you have them and you like them and then you overdo it, or you stop like having them and you stop trying to improve, then you are in another dead alley.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. It's it's everything ends up being balance in terms of or just trying to figure out what do I continue to actively rely on, what do you need people to be doing, what do you need machines to be doing. You've been very much on the ops side of things, or what you'd consider that. if you had a chance to speak to a room of developers in terms of, hey, from an ops team perspective, from a availability, reliability perspective, here's a few things we'd love for you to be doing to help make our lives easier. Put something in the code or whatever. Do you feel like there's a kind of a set of things that you might recommend to devs, to application developers that would sort of make everybody's life easier, but maybe immediately your lives easier?
Yeah, I guess the most important revelation that we had in the last years is that you should instrument your code, right? And who instruments the code? That's developers. Well, like the traditional approach, I think I mentioned that very early, was this idea that monitoring, alerting, observability, whatever we call it, or what like sub areas of it where we are trying to tackle is something the ops people do by setting up Nagios and sending probes or whatever. But developers, like code needs to be instrumented. Now, I was in this like very fortunate situation that at Google, there was certainly a clear division between developers and ops, but ops was done by SREs, right? Was it called ops? I don't know. Like it was called SRE. And SREs are developers. This is like this famous quote from Ben Traynor that SRE is what happens if you ask developers to implement an operations function, right? Or something like that. It's written on the internet somewhere how it goes exactly. But this is where I never really felt like an ops person. I always felt I'm a software engineer, right? Yeah. I'm solving problems that I have by developing software. And at SoundCloud, we had a really strict, like that was also written into SoundCloud's history, essentially. In this SRE, Seeking SRE book I mentioned, we also have a chapter written by SoundClouders about this. There was pretty early on, it was quite, there was a quite strong notion of you build it, you run it. So you didn't really have a strong division between ops and devs. And perhaps that was also a reason that it was easy at SoundCloud to teach developers to instrument their code. And instrument means, it could just mean log stuff, it could mean have a metric, or it could mean tracing even. And ideally, it's all of that. And it's actually not that hard. And developers start to love it once they have it. It's something you will miss a lot once you know that it was there, but you have never thought about it before. Yeah, I think that's the most important pattern. If you are not in an environment where developers and ops people aren't that different anyway.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. It's kind of the classic chicken and egg of, if you would do this extra work up front, the benefit downstream is going to be beneficial both to you as the application developer, but also to the broader team, and then you've got to convince them, how to carve out cycles to do that and include it in their code, and it can get left out. Have you found sort of any anti-pattern in that? Do you find they do something else that prevents? I mean, is time and effort just the most common reason why it doesn't happen, or is there some other reason why we just haven't seen that become a regular practice yet?
I mean, I guess it's incentive structure, right? If you read the Google SRE books, and it's a lot about incentive structures. And again, like you should not just try to copy Google because Google is like really big. If you're also really big, of course, you can probably apply that more directly, but they have incentive structures. You can see this with like the whole definition of error budgets, for example, is an interesting problem. How to solve this eternal struggle between devs and ops, because the ops want to keep the existing system running and the devs want to push new features. Like, how do you reconcile that? And error budgets is a very straightforward and elegant way to reconcile that. But in smaller organization, you might just have a completely different incentive structure. Like, for example, at SoundCloud, where on many other like modern internet enterprises that are not that big, you have this pattern where the developers are on call for their own systems, and then they shortcut the incentive structure, and they see if they invest more time into making the system more reliable, make it more observable, that it will actually give them more time to develop new features instead of less, because if they don't do this, they are like firefighting all the time. Yeah, so, and it's again an example where, like, depending on your context, your decisions what to do might be very different.
Yeah. No, it is the never-ending sort of trade-off that we have between putting the time in up front versus downstream versus, do we fix it with tools? Do we fix it with better practices and all? And so, with that, I'm going to kind of wrap it up. Björn, I want to thank you so much for the time, folks. We talk a lot about some of the different conferences Björn's going to be giving, as he mentioned, a really good talk based on his experience at VelocityConf in Berlin. So, as we mentioned earlier in the show, if you want to get a chance to register for that, if you're going to be over there, there are some discount codes in the show notes. So with that, before we wrap it up, thanks again to this week's sponsors, DigitalOcean and PricingWire. It's easy to learn more about PricingWire and book a strategy session at pricingwire.com. Björn, with that, if anybody wants to reach out to you, maybe contact you on Twitter or, some other way, do you have a good way that you enjoy interacting with the community or kind of learning and so forth?
Yeah, I'm that horrible old man yelling at cloud, having no Twitter account.
Oh, no.
But I have a GitHub account where you can find me. Also, my name is, I think, fairly unique on the internet. So it's very easy to follow me, my activities. Most of my talks are videotaped. I even have a GitHub repo just to track my talks. And there's also, if you have a GitHub account, there's an email address how to contact me. So it should be easy to find me if you want to get in touch.
Very good. And we'll get some of those in the show notes as well for folks. So, folks, as we wrap it up today, I want to thank both DigitalOcean and PricingWire for sponsoring today's show. It's easy to learn more about PricingWire and book a strategy session at pricingwire.com. So with that, we're going to wrap it up. We want to thank everybody for listening every week. We want to thank everybody for telling a friend, for rating the show and sharing it on iTunes and all the other places. And with that, we're going to wrap it up and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.